Hi, I'm Daniel Lucas, and welcome to Abstract Essay, where ideas take shape, thoughts find depth, and every conversation explores the art of thinking beyond the obvious. And today I have my special guest. He is a perspective wisdom, tips, and strategies for communication with your child. No other than Mr. David Marcus.
Hi, Daniel. How are you?
I'm fabulous, fabulous, Mr. David. And can you please introduce more about yourself?
Yes, I have a PhD in child clinical psychology. I've been in practice for 40 years, specializing in families under stress. Uh, what I have found is that the stress in the family, especially in cases of divorce, etc., is because of bad communication between parents and how that impacts on the communication with their children. So that's what I've been specializing in for many years in helping parents to communicate more effectively with their children and vice versa.
Mr. David, why is having a shared emotional language with your child is important for their development?
Well, most parents, in fact, all the parents that I've seen, make a silent assumption about their children. That assumption is that words like emotional words like anger, anxiety, or fear have the same emotional meaning to the child as it does to them. So they assume the child experiences their emotions the same way that they do. And this gets in the way of helping the child to develop their own emotional language and what I call a common emotional language with their parents.
Mr. David, how do you define emotional language beyond just naming
Mhm.
feelings?
Well, children begin their life without an emotional language. And this is why children act out on their emotions rather than talk about them. It comes through interaction with their parents that they develop the capacity to what we typically call using their words. Many parents turn to their children when they act out. They hit their brother or something like that, and they say, you know, I told you don't hit, use your words. And I had an experience once with a couple of brothers and their mom, and I just seen the brothers, 7 and 9, and I was talking briefly with their mother, and the boys were in the waiting room right outside my office door, and all of a sudden we heard a scream. So we both go out there, and there was the 9-year-old's holding his arm like this with tears, and the 7-year-old's really looking like, oh, I'm in big trouble. So mom said to the boys, and I was observing this, what happened? And the older boy said, he bit me. And he picked up his shirt like this, and there were bite marks on his arm. He really bit him. So the mom was, really embarrassed. Here she is in the psychologist's office, and her children are biting one another. So she turned to the 7-year-old and said to him, I told you to use your words. And the 7-year-old, in all innocence, looked at his mom and said, I don't know how. And I said to the mom, that's what we have to work on. He has to develop an emotional language, and one where the emotions are using his words, not yours. And so I train people, parents, on how to do that. I can give you an example. I saw a boy, he was 9, and he was having anger problems. So we started talking about things that made him angry, and we came up with a couple of phrases. I gave him a scale of 1 to 10, one being it doesn't make me very angry, and 10 being I'm furious. And I said, well, give me an example of something in your family that would make you feel a 1. Hardly angry. He says, well, when my mom makes me eat my peas. Okay. Tell me an experience that with your family that is a 10. And he said, "Oh, and my mom yells at me and makes me do things I don't want to do. So how mad does that make you?" And he said, "That makes me volcano mad. Volcano mad." So from then on, when we spoke about things that made him angry, I would ask him, "Is that like eat your peas mad or volcano mad?" Because those are the words that have meaning to him. Those are the words that he could describe best. With younger children, I'll use hand motions. This angry, this angry, this angry, this angry, this angry. And it amazes me how children can actually touch their hands behind their back and they'll say things like, "It made me universe mad, Dr. Marcus." You know, it would make me mad the whole world, Dr. Marcus. And I start using those phrases with the children because that's the language we would have in common as far as describing their emotions. And through that, they can start to express themselves with words. And we develop more and more words to describe it. Um, and it continues from there. And then I share uh, that language with the parents so they can use it as well. At the same time, I talk to them about how to make it safe for the child to use the language that they're developing. Because there's a lot of things that parents do that get in the way of the children feeling safe to tell their parents how they feel with words. And this is a very important part of maturation, Daniel, because when a child can use his words, he doesn't act out behaviorally. So when a 5-year-old doesn't have a language to express his emotions and he throws a temper tantrum or he hits somebody, we kind of expect that and we can control that. But if you never develop the capacity to do that and you turn 17 or 18, well, obviously, you know, a 17 or 18-year-old acting out on their emotions by hitting somebody is no longer a tantrum. It could be jail time. I mean, they have to figure out how to use their words. So this is a developmental process that I try to help parents to do after I start doing it with their children.
What's the most common barriers parents face when trying to connect emotionally with their kids?
Well, there's a number of things that parents do, in all innocence, really, that gets in the way. You want to make it safe for the child to express their feelings with words, as I just said. But what parents often do is they try to make their child feel better. Now, as a psychologist who deals with children, it sounds very odd coming from me that I wish I could get away from the phrase make feel better because it doesn't work. What parents typically do is a child will begin to explain something that's bothering them, and the parent will cut in and say, "Oh, I went through that too, and this is what I did, and this is what you can do, and you'll feel all better." Well, it cuts off the child's ability to actually express what his emotions are because the parent's already jumping in and telling him what he should do. Now, if as an adult, Daniel, if you turn to somebody with something that was difficult for you and you began to explain it, and they cut in on you and said, "Oh, I know what you're talking about. Just do this and you'll feel all better." If they were a good friend, my guess is you turn to them and say, "Just hear me out." If it wasn't a good friend, you might say, "Thank you," and go find a good friend to be able to try it again. With children, you wouldn't expect a 5-year-old or a 7-year-old to turn to their parents and say, "Mom, will you just be quiet and let me explain myself?" They're not going to do that. You're big and they're little, and they're not going to do that. And so they'll listen and be quiet because you cut off the communication. And the parent feels, okay, I made my child feel all better because they're not talking anymore. Until 3 days later, something similar happens, and the child is just as upset as they were 3 days before. And the parent says, "I don't get it. We talked about this." No, you didn't. You thought you talked about it. All you did was talk at your child and probably misinterpreted what he was feeling because you weren't using the correct language to help him to express himself. So, this is a very important part of parenting, to develop this type of a language with your child and to make it safe. Like I just said, one of the things that gets in the way is trying to make the child feel better. There's other ways of getting in the way of the child communicating with you, like redirecting the child, trying to get them not to think about what was bothering them, or trying to make light of it, or giving them a platitude saying, "Oh, life is tough." Well, that doesn't really help the child either. So these are all ways that parents try to um, help their child, but actually they're getting in the way of their child developing an emotional language by not making it safe for them to express themselves.
Mr. David, let's talk about the building emotional vocabulary. How can parents teach emotions to young children in a way that sticks?
Well, I'm beginning to describe that to you. The first thing is it depends on the age of the child too. Okay, very young children, you don't expect them to have an emotional language. So there's a couple of things that you may do with a child 3 or 4 years old, and that is you can begin with like pictures of emotions, and there's common pictures of emotions, faces with emotions. You point to that picture and say, what is that face feeling? And it's a happy face, a sad face, a frightened face, an angry face, perhaps a frustrated face. And the child will use their own words to describe what it is, and I'll write that underneath the picture, and we'll start using those words to describe it. All right. With older children that already have some of a vocabulary, you go through what I just talked about, where you get volcano mad, or you get eat your peas mad, or mad to the whole universe. I actually came up with a game that parents can play with their children that will actually help this process, and I'll share it with your audience. I initially called it Mad Ball, and it's based on this. Young children, uh, especially young boys, but even young girls, want to show their parents how strong they are. So I got a ball that was plastic, but not hard plastic. And I tell the child, think of something that makes you really mad, and then tell me what it is and throw the ball into the wall as hard as you want. And the little boys really got into this. And so when my dad goes away and doesn't take me with him, that makes me really mad. Throws the ball to the wall, wham, makes a noise. And I'll say, how mad does it make you? 1 to 10. Or how mad does it make you, with hand motions? Can we find another word for that? And again, we're developing a common emotional language with the child by using their own words. All right. Sometimes what I'll do with Madball is I always talk to parents. I never see children without seeing their parents. And the parents will tell me some of the things that make the child angry. So I will take turns with the child. The child will say something, makes them angry, and then I'll take the ball and I'll say something that I know makes a child angry, as if it happens to me. I used to hate when my parents would not take me with them, rather, when they went someplace. And I'll throw the ball into the wall. And the boy his eyes would go this way. Me too, Dr. Marcus, me too. And he'll take the ball from me and throw the ball into the wall as hard as he can. Okay. So you continue this, and you can make it sad ball. You can make it scared ball, but since children begin by expressing themselves physically, this is a way of connecting their physical actions with words and developing that language. What's something that's funny, Daniel, is the first time I did this, because my waiting room, the wall I was using in my office, had the common wall with my waiting room. So the parents are out there and they hear against the wall, thump, 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 and they think I'm beating up their child. So they came knocking at the door and said, Dr. Marcus, is everything okay? And I had to laugh, and I explained to them, what we were doing. And after that, I always had to explain to parents in my waiting room, this is what I'm going to do. Don't worry, everything's okay.
Hmm.
But so it was kind of funny. But that's another a game that uh, parents can play with their child to develop an emotional language, and making it safe there's a whole process in making it safe. Obviously, the toughest time to make it safe for a child is if the child is complaining about something about the parent. Mommy, I don't like it when you do that. Mommy, I hate this, or Mommy, I hate you. Well, the natural response to that would be to defend yourself and get very logical with the child and say, well, there's no reason why you should hate me, and give a nice logical explanation for why the child should not feel the way they do. That never works because you're not dealing with logic, you're dealing with emotions. You know, many parents try to explain logically to their children. They basically try to explain away their children's emotions by saying, you shouldn't feel that way because of this, this, and this. Well, the child's feeling the way they're feeling, not just because of what happened today, but how they perceive that parent in different situations over time. So simply saying, today you shouldn't be mad because this is what happened, this was happened, so you have no right to be mad. The parent is missing the boat because the reaction of the child is not just based on what's happening today. It's not logical. An example: one child uh, threw a temper tantrum at a store. My parent told me about it, and when she explored it using the methods that she was learning from me, she found out that he was mad at his brother, he was harassing in the store, because his brother had 3 desserts 2 days before, and he only had one because he was sent away from the table for being bad. So he was mad at his brother because his brother had more desserts than he did. It had nothing to do with the store. It had to do with his perception of mom being unfair because his brother got more food than he did. So these things can be very subtle, but you have to be able to access that. And if the parent jumps in too quickly and gives explanations, the child has no opportunity to develop the language and feel safe and explain themselves. So this is the important part of learning how the parent can help the child to express themselves and make it safe for them to express themselves.
Mr. Marcos, how do you adapt emotional language for different ages?
Okay. Well, that's a good question, Daniel, because many parents make a silent assumption. Well, actually, not so silent. They have a bright child who has a good vocabulary, so they assume that they have a good emotional language because they're bright children who have a good vocabulary. That's a bad assumption to make. The development of an emotional language is a totally separate skill that comes through interaction with the parents or other significant adults in the child's life. And if you don't do that, the child may be very bright and just begin to, what I call, cerebralize their emotions. They try to explain everything logically because that's what their parents want to hear, but it doesn't really help the child. The child is just putting on an act of being the bright child because that's what they get praised for. So you see, some of these things can get kind of subtle, you know. So, one of the things that happen if that kind of thing persists, and it's very common with high achieving families, um, the child begins to realize that they have to achieve a lot, to meet their parents' expectations so their parents will like them. So they become overachievers and they become depressed because all they're doing is trying to achieve to please their parents. They're not really being able to express themselves. They're simply trying to please their parents. So that's another subtlety. So, so parents need to learn how to what's called empty out their child. You want me to explain that process to you, Daniel?
Please do, Mr. David.
Okay. Okay. What do I mean? Excuse me. This is how I explain it to parents. We all have of an emotional space within us. And typically we pour into our heart, our chest when we think about our feelings. But in actuality, it's connections and associations in our mind. And this emotional space can get filled up with intense emotion. Obvious ones like fear, anxiety, and anger. But in little children, it could even be intense glee from getting a favorite toy. It's the intensity of the emotion that fills us up. And we know when we're filled up. We have phrases that describe it, very common ones. For instance, in the American culture, it's very common to have phrases like, I've had it up to here, or the stroke, that's the no, the stroke that broke the camel's back, the straw that broke the camel's back. So we know when we're filled up. And what I explain to parents is that what happens when we're filled up? Well, we've all had this experience. It feels intense, like we're out of control of our emotions. It can be scary. So, what do? We focus inwardly on how we're feeling and try to deal with it in some way. We may talk to somebody and get it off our chest. We may write in a journal how we're feeling. We may go for a run to get rid of the energy. We may watch television to distract ourselves. But the point is this: when we're so filled up with our intense emotions, when we are focused inwardly, so by definition, we're not focused outwardly on what people are saying to us. Uh, I don't know if you've ever heard the phrase a blinding rage. Blinding rage. Well, that's a good explanation, because when somebody is so filled up with anger, they're virtually blind to the things that are going on around them. A person can give the most logical, calm explanation for why that person shouldn't be so angry, for instance, and that person will not hear it. They'll hear maybe the 5% of what's said that somehow supports their rage, or a tone of voice that somehow supports their rage, and they just get angrier. So the person sitting there is just saying, after a while, they realize they're not getting through. They just say, I give up. I can't talk to you. And that can happen between couples and married couples, and builds walls between them. And it can lead to some very bad things. And it also doesn't help them to help their children to express themselves, because they're so filled up themselves. So obviously, from what I'm saying is, even for somebody to even who's filled up with intense emotion to even hear you, they have to be emptied out. How do you do that? Well, of course, being a good listener helps, and not answering and asking open-ended questions, but it's really your demeanor. You have to have a soothing presence, so the person realizes that no matter what they say, you're okay. So they can sort of borrow your okayness and keep talking. You know, in other words, the person doesn't get defensive. They don't try to change the subject. They don't try to they just mirror back what they're hearing. Now, here's an important part of this, because when you empty out somebody, you're actually needing to empty them out on three different levels. Okay. The most superficial level is the here and now. Something's happening right now that's making somebody upset. All right. And I usually use a simple example to explain what I mean by the three levels. Uh, you didn't take out the garbage. Now we have lots of words to describe to the person why they should have taken out the garbage. It's your job. It's getting messy and smelly. Please take out the garbage. Okay, that's the here and now level. The next deeper level that needs to be emptied out is what I call the history level. And this is how it works. This is the sixth time I've asked you to take out the garbage and you haven't done it. Now, obviously, the person's going to be more upset having to ask the sixth time for the person to take out the garbage than they would on the first time they asked them. But if you didn't know the history, And you turn to that person and go, what's the big deal? So they didn't take out the garbage. Why are you making such a big deal out of it? So the logic begins to break down at that point. The deepest level is the tapped into level. Tapped into level. The fact that you didn't take out the garbage after I asked you to do it 6 times means you don't listen to me. I hate when you don't listen to me. My father didn't listen to me, and I was always getting into trouble because he always blamed me for things. This one can go anywhere because it goes into the person's personal history. You see, all those levels need to be emptied out. And when you're getting, and you can even elicit these levels, like for instance, after the superficial level, if a person starts saying things like, you always do this or you never do that, well, now they're dealing with past experiences, and that's the history level. So the listener would say, tell me about how I never do this or I always do that, and empty out on that level. The deepest level is when you get through the history level and say, it just makes me so upset. Tell me about being upset. You use their words, not your own. You don't sum up, and you mirror back, oh, you're upset because I didn't hear it, and because your parents didn't listen to you, and I don't listen to you, and no. And at the end of that, the person's emptied out. And now they can hear you when you say something like, based on how you see it, no wonder you feel the way you do. You're validating their perception, even though you may not agree with it. Notice the qualifier, Daniel, based on how you see it. Because now that they're emptied out, now they can hear you. You can say, I don't blame you for feeling that way. I see it kind of differently. And now you have a chance to explain it, how you saw it. And the last part is, okay, we see it differently. What can we do to make it any better? And that's the constructive part of the process, of the emptying out process. Okay. But you have to go through the process. You can't just jump to the solution like people do because the person's not ready to hear it. They're still filled up and still need to express all this and get it out so they can now hear you. So this is quite a process, and it's different for children at different ages. It's different between adults based on their own family histories. And so this gets to be kind of subtle and complicated at the same time. So every family I see is different. So you have to be able to understand these differences and help the people to understand their differences. Because once they understand their differences, they stop blaming one another. Oh, it's not that this person doesn't just listen to me. It's because it taps into something within me that makes me even more upset, which has nothing to do with this other person. It has to do with the fact that this is part of my history. That can be very constructive for people to understand one another. There's more to it than that, but well, if you want to ask me another question here, please do.
Yes, Mr. David, before we wrap up our discussion for today, I'm inviting you to please do listen to my other podcast, people. My other podcast, because my abstract essay is already in fifth season, abstract poetry in second season,
Hmm.
and my book 101 review in fifth season too, comedy 101 in second season, and my food 101 in fifth season as well, geography 101 in its fourth season, and my baby podcast, law 101, and mental health 101, love letters in third season, and Movie 101 review and Music 101 in fourth season, and Science 101 and Sex 101 in
Well,
its first
thank you.
season.
I'd like to share with your audience that if they are interested in pursuing some of the things that I'm talking about, I I can consult with them. I have a website. It's called parentrx.org. PARENTRX, like parent prescription, .org, and they can reach me directly at dsmarcus, DSMARCUS all one word, at parentrx.org. All right. And I also have a book that I'm hoping that will come out within the year. And the title of that book is also, Parent RX. I want to give you the entire title. Uh, well, hold on one second, please. All right. Because it has a subtitle as well.
Go ahead, mister.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Okay, the title of the book will be Parent RX Prescriptive Wisdom, Tips, and Strategies for Communication with Your Child. Okay, so if people want to get in touch with me, they can get in touch with me like that.
Yes, people, let's support Mr. David Marcus, because if you support him, for sure, more and more empowering books like this to come. So, Mr. David, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
More to come, people. See you soon.
Well,